Story 1. The disposable camera with one shot already used. The camera appeared outside Daniel Mercer's apartment on a Tuesday morning, sitting on the concrete ledge beside his door as though someone had simply set it down and walked away. No bag, no note. A yellow disposable camera, the cheap kind that gas stations stopped selling years ago, with the film counter reading 23. Someone had already used one shot. Daniel picked it up. It was lighter than it should have been. Not dramatically so, just enough that his hand registered the wrongness of it, like picking up a piece of fruit that had gone hollow inside. The winding wheel was faintly warm, despite the cold that had settled into the hallway overnight. Cold enough that Daniel's breath came out in faint clouds as he turned the camera over in his hands, looking for a brand name, a sticker, anything. There was nothing. He brought it inside. He thought about throwing it away. He made coffee instead. He knew a man named Marcus who worked at the last photo lab in the city, still processing disposable cameras, a narrow shop on Mercer Street that smelled like chemicals and old carpet. Daniel dropped the camera off that afternoon with the mild curiosity of someone opening a piece of mail that wasn't addressed to them. Marcus called at 3:42. His voice was flat in a way Daniel had never heard from him. He said the prints were ready. He said Daniel should come get them personally. He said nothing else. The envelope on the counter had Daniel's name written on it in Marcus's handwriting. Daniel hadn't given his name. When he asked, Marcus said he'd written it automatically, that he'd known it somehow, and that he'd prefer not to discuss the photographs further. 23 prints. The first 22 were unremarkable. Hallways, a street corner, a condensation-filmed window. Ordinary images that could have belonged to anyone. The 23rd was Daniel. He was lying in a casket. His hands were folded with the careful arrangement of someone else's work. His face held the particular emptiness that faces acquire when the person has left them permanently. He was wearing a dark green Henley shirt. The timestamp in orange at the bottom of the image read 11:47 a.m., 6 hours in the future from the moment he stood holding it. Daniel spent the night awake. He removed the green shirt from his closet and left it outside in a garbage bag. He sat on his kitchen floor through 11:47 a.m. with every light burning, watching the clock until the minute passed. He felt certain he had altered something. What he failed to consider was the camera's film counter when he found it. 23. One shot already taken. 22 shots remaining. He had developed 23 photographs. Somewhere between the lab and his hands, a photograph had been added to the sequence. Or rather, a photograph that hadn't been taken yet, that couldn't have been taken yet, had found its way into sequence. The question that should have consumed him from the beginning wasn't who left the camera, it was who took the first shot, the one that was already used when he found it, the one that was never in the envelope, the one that Marcus refused, even now, to describe. Story 2. Someone keeps leaving Polaroids in my apartment. It's been some time now since everything started, since the photos began appearing, taped or tacked up around my apartment. At first, they were miscellaneous, just random, obscure Polaroids with dim lighting and obstructed views. Of course, regardless of how harmless they first appeared, a wave of unease washed over me as I thought about the implications. I mean, someone had to have placed them in my apartment, took the time to pin them around in places they knew I'd find them. On the bathroom mirror, taped to the television. Some dangled from threads, swaying back and forth in my hallway, dancing in the wind of my air vents. The one that really shook me, however, was the one that I found in my bedroom. I'd rolled over onto my back one morning, awoken by my alarm clock when I first saw it, nailed to my ceiling. I stared at the thing, dazed for a moment before I realized what it was. For the first time since the photos began appearing, I had finally found one that I recognized. I stood on my tiptoes atop my mattress, stretching my arms so far above my head that I nearly cramped before my fingertips grazed the photograph. It ripped as I collapsed under myself, dragging it down with me. Placing the two pieces together like a puzzle, I felt a frigid chill run down my spine as I realized what I was looking at. My bedroom door, taken from the hallway while all the lights in my apartment were out. The door was illuminated only by the flash of the camera. I held the photo in my hand, feeling only the weight of its meaning as I stared at it. My mind began to race 1,000,000 miles an hour, and all I could think to do was place the photograph in the box along with the rest of them. That night, as an extra precaution, I slid a chair under my bedroom door handle after triple checking that the front door had been bolted and latched. I slept with a knife under my pillow, and throughout the night was plagued with horrible nightmares. Nightmares that depicted a dark, shadowy man standing over me as I slept, smiling as he held a camera to my face. I awoke early the next morning, drenched in sweat and shirtless. My eyes shifted around the room, analyzing the area for anything that looked out of place. The very first thing I noticed was the chair, gracefully slid away from the door and resting on the opposite side of my bedroom. The next thing I noticed was the knife that protruded from the wall near my nightstand. The tip of the blade had been shoved through a new photograph, this one revealing a long arm that extended and held my shirt tightly in its hand. The photo shook in my hands, and I could hear my heart thumping in my ears as the paranoia grew. I couldn't go to the police, not after how they treated me during my incident. All I had was myself. I scouted out the apartment, going through every room and putting my ear to the walls to listen for any sign of an intruder. All I was met with was silence, save for the sound of pipes and ventilation. That night, I did more than use a chair to hold my door closed. I must have slid nearly every piece of furniture in my bedroom in front of that door. When I awoke the next morning, I was relieved to find that my bed was still in its place in front of the bedroom door, along with all the other furniture that I'd moved. However, there was one extra object to the right of my bed that I knew for a fact had not been there the night prior. A Polaroid camera, along with a photograph sticking out of its mouth. I slowly retrieved the photo, my breath catching in my throat in anticipation. As I examined the photo, it felt like time itself had stopped around me. There I was, lying in bed, wide awake and staring at the camera. My mouth was stretched into an inhuman smile, and my eyes looked completely void of life, soulless in every sense of the word. Not again, I sighed to myself. With a bitter reluctance, I took the photo and placed it carefully in the box along with the others. I made a promise to myself that if I ever caught myself slipping like this again, I was going to take my evidence straight to my psychiatrist. And this meeting is not one I'm looking forward to. Story 3. In late June, early July, I started living in an apartment with my old smoking buddy, Matt. Matt ran this squat he called the Way Station. Nowadays, it was less for the squatters and more for Matt's buddies from his job at Burger King. It was a pretty fun place to be, and we had house parties every night. About a week after I moved in, a couple of my buddies came over to watch the game. During a commercial, I went out for a smoke. While I was out on the porch, this punk-looking kid came up and sat down next to me. He introduced himself as Nate, and we talked for a few minutes. He told me that he was supposed to be moving into the squat. Matt never told me anything regarding who was living there anymore. Nate and I ended up getting along great. Don't get me wrong, Matt's a great guy and all, but you can't have any kind of meaningful conversation with him. Nate was the opposite. I mean, at parties, he was awkward as fuck, but when it was just 2 or 3 of us, we would talk for hours about anything and everything. Nate had come from South Boston to visit his girlfriend, who apparently lived about a block from the squat, though no one had ever seen her before. I later found out that this was because she went to a local prep school and was like insanely smart. They met on some dating site for people who love Star Wars and crime shows and all that geeky shit. He was always over at her place, and he didn't take up much space here, so no one really noticed when he was gone. On the off chance that he was at the squat, we had discussions regarding politics, religion, drugs, anything under the sun. Eventually, during one of our philosophical convoys, I asked him if he believed in the paranormal. He replied that he did. For a little backstory, I've been going into haunted houses since as long as I can remember. I've always been into ghosts and demons and shit. We talked about this for a while before I decided to pop the question. So, has anything paranormal ever happened to you? Like, just anything weird that you just can't explain? Nate looked at his feet. I have to go meet my girlfriend. I'll catch you later, bro. Even now, I regret asking that question. About 3 weeks later, Nate's girlfriend broke up with him for reasons I still don't quite understand. Apparently, she was a lesbian or something. You'd have to ask him. I didn't have the heart to. I came home from a smoke session to find him on the kitchen floor in a crumpled position next to an empty bottle of OxyContin pills. He groggily raised his head when I came into the room. Guess I didn't take enough. I kicked him in the stomach, hard enough to make him vomit up the remains of whatever was in there. I was livid, but at the same time, sympathetic. I've been that far down before, and it ain't fun. I gave him a pen and paper and told him to write down everything he wanted to accomplish in life, sort of like a bucket list. Told him no one would ever see it but him, and made him promise that he would stay alive until he had completed everything on the list. Nate hastily scribbled down a few notes, then put the paper in his pocket and stumbled into the living room, where he collapsed on a couch in a drug-induced stupor. As I sat in the chair next to him, I suddenly became aware of an intense curiosity. I had to know what he had written on that paper. I mean, I was fucking baked, but at the same time, his cryptic answer to the paranormal question a few weeks back had been eating away at me. So I decided to give it a quick look to see if it had any clues. Just one look, then I'd put it back in his pocket. He'd never even know. Letting my curiosity get the better of me, I did just that. The paper read, "To the people who matter most. 1. My brother. 2. My mentor. 3. Jesse Mack." Okay, so it was just paranoia. It was a completely average bucket list, and I was just stoned out of my mind. I slipped the note back into his pocket and turned on the TV. Still, there was something that struck me as odd about that third name. Jesse Mack sounded familiar, like something from my childhood I couldn't quite put my finger on. I never told Matt what happened. Nate was still asleep when he got home from work. We watched a few movies, including this really strange one called Being John Malkovich, which was Matt's favorite for reasons I didn't really understand. About halfway through the movie, I looked over at Matt. "Hey, remember Jesse Mack?" Matt started cracking up. The fuck kind of parent names their kid Jesse Mack? I smiled back. Some parents in Boston, I guess. Matt couldn't stop laughing. I mean, are you fucking serious? Jesse Mack? Jesse fucking Mack. "Hey everyone, I'm Jesse Mack, and I'm from Dorchester." He was shouting in a faux Boston accent now. It was pretty hilarious. At the same time, there was something slightly eerie about it, and I started feeling guilty about taking the note from Nate's pocket. Nate started to wake up sometime later. He was in a lot of pain, but he managed to grin at me while attempting to sit up. Matt was in another part of the apartment, shouting at himself, which was actually pretty normal. A few hours later, we were all just sitting together watching the South Park movie. We watched a lot of movies here. Every few minutes, Nate had a little nervous spasm, but it was nowhere near as bad as he'd been. Matt turned to him. "So, about Jesse Mack, I need to meet this person. She sounds so frickin' hot." There's no way I could have predicted what was about to happen. In a fraction of a second,
Nate jumped off of the couch, backed himself into a corner, whipped out his pocket knife, and pointed it straight at Matt. He was shaking all over. In a barely audible whisper that sounded as if he was gasping for air, he mouthed, "Don't you fucking come near me. You have no idea what you're doing. No fucking clue. Don't ever fucking mention her name again." And with that, Nate vomited all over the carpet and passed out on the floor again.
What happened after that was pretty much a blur. I was trying to find a job at the time, so I didn't get to spend as much time at the house. Nate became extremely paranoid, especially around Matt. He would hole up in his room with a terrified expression on his face, pointing this little BB pistol he had at anything that moved. And knowing Nate, this was odd. Nate was about as big as a bear, with facial hair to match and an unusually laid-back disposition before all this went down. Matt, on the other hand, was manic all the time. He'd run around the kitchen screaming, "My name is Jesse Mack," at the top of his lungs in his obnoxious fake Boston accent, though it was clearly making Nate's condition worse. At one point, I woke up in the night and heard part of a conversation between Nate and his ex on our porch. He was begging her to stay with him or something. When she refused, his tone turned from sadness to terror, the terror of one who has seen too much. She left, telling him he was talking like a crazy person. Matt kept having strange people over whom I'd never seen before. Eventually, whenever someone I didn't know came over, Nate and I would go for a walk down the avenue until they left. I never heard much of what they talked about, but at several different times I heard a few people in the living room mutter, "Jesse fucking Mack, holy shit," or something to that effect. This was clearly upsetting to Nate, and every time he heard the name, he'd revert to his paranoid, vomiting state. In late August, he decided to leave here for good. He was so sick he could barely stand up. I ended up carrying most of his luggage to the bus station with him. On our way there, everyone was staring at us. I mean, I don't blame them. You don't see too many punk teenagers carrying suitcases through some bumfuck town in New Jersey. As we passed the railroad bridge, a man in a truck threw some kind of gang sign at a group of kids in their early 20s. As he drove by, he shouted, "Jesse fucking Mack!" Everyone in the group started pumping their fists in the air. Nate emptied his stomach on the ground next to the bridge. We kept running into gangs on the way to the bus station, almost like they knew we'd be out today. Gangs that had been fighting each other for decades, standing out in the open, chest bumping, fist pumping, as if they were unifying against some unseen force, all shouting, "Jesse Mack!" By the time we got to the bus station, Nate was in real bad shape. I hugged him goodbye and told him to go find a new place to live, one where no one knew anything about him, or Jesse Mack. He smiled back at me, then managed to laugh. "Funny," he said. "That's exactly what they told me back in Boston." That was the last time I saw him before October. After that, I moved back in with my dad in this little town about an hour from Matt's apartment. I got a real job, bought a junk car, the whole works. I even started dating this girl I really liked back in high school. 3 months in, Matt's house made me feel like I had aged 10 years, but I was finally stepping out into the light. I doubted I would ever see either of them again. At some point in September, Matt put up some website with some weird MP3 loop of him and a bunch of other people screaming, "I am Jesse Mack, Jesse fucking Mack." Just that, over and over again. Someone told me that Matt was signing his work checks as Jesse Mack now. None of his old friends really hang out with him anymore, so it's hard to verify anything I hear about him these days. The next time I saw Nate, it was mid-October. He had apparently come back to NJ to try to reason with Matt to tell him to shut down the webpage. The site itself had gathered over 50,000 hits, which was an all-right count for the shittiest music in the world. Matt was also selling Jesse Mack clothing, which was being bought more rapidly than any other local product I'd ever seen. Nate only stayed for 3 days, and I was at work for the first 2. When I finally saw him, he was standing outside in Matt's driveway in the pouring rain, looking about as bad off as when I left him the last time. After about 20 minutes of trying to reason with him, we went inside.
I didn't even recognize the place. In the foyer, 2 of the walls were bashed in. It had always been a dirty apartment, but now it looked as if no one had lived there in years. All over the house, walls were punched through. Any space that still had a wall had writing on it. Most of the writing was in Gaelic, so I don't know what the fuck it said, but there were several references to Jesse Mack being the name of an ancient Gaelic entity. The English translation of the name was the descendant of the Dark One. Nate nodded solemnly, as if he had known this all along. There was an old couple shooting heroin on one of the couches. The woman looked up at her boyfriend, saying, "I want to get closer. You don't even understand. I want to get closer to Jesse Mack." The man looked up at us. "Matt'll be home in a few hours. He's going to play guitar and put on a show for us." He gestured toward a guitar in the corner with a broken neck, 3 working strings, and the words Jesse Mack crudely carved across the bottom panel. Nate ran out of the house screaming. I cornered him in an alleyway. Rain streamed down his face, but nonetheless, I could tell he was sobbing. "You're not even fucking real," he shouted at me. "You live in my head. None of this is real. It's all just a fucking joke." I tried to comfort him, but he wasn't taking it. I know, I'm a fucking crazy person. That's what everyone says." We sat together for a few hours, and he calmed down a bit, as did the rain. "I'm done," he finally said. "I'm done with this. You have no idea how done I am with this. I'm going back. I'm gonna be a good person this time. I'm gonna be a vegan, just like this kid I used to know told me to. I'll go back to school. I'll do anything. Just someone, please, make this fucking go away." He left the next morning. I never saw him again.